The Last Listener. The soundproof booth feels less like a studio tonight and more like an upright coffin. The on-air sign bleeds a sickly red across the mixing board, illuminating the jagged waveform that proves I'm losing my mind. I used to be a storyteller, a skeptic peddling nightmares I didn't believe in to keep the midnight commuters awake. But the audio doesn't lie. I zoomed in on the raw track from last night. There are two voices. Identical pitch, identical cadence. But the second voice, the intruder, isn't an echo. It starts 3 milliseconds before I speak. I'm not generating the words anymore. I'm just the meat puppet repeating them. And if you're listening to this with headphones, for God's sake, don't turn up the volume. It's trying to hear you breathing.
Chapter 1. The Frequency of Fear. The red on-air light hummed with a low-voltage buzz that only I seemed to hear. It was the heartbeat of the studio, a claustrophobic little box soundproofed with gray acoustic foam that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and aerosol dust cleaner. I leaned into the Shure SM7B microphone, letting my voice drop to that gravelly, conspiratorial register that paid my rent. "And remember," I murmured, watching the green bars on the monitor dance in sync with my syllables, "when you stare into the dark, don't blink. It's rude to ignore your guests. Good night, insomniacs." I held the silence for 3 seconds. Dead air creates tension, before hitting the cut button. The red light died. The studio exhaled. I ripped the headphones off, tossing them onto the mixing desk. The persona of the night watchman evaporated instantly, replaced by Elias Thorne, a tired 30-something with a caffeine headache and a profound lack of belief in the supernatural garbage I peddled. The Midnight Signal was a hit, consistently charting in the top 10 for horror podcasts. I read urban legends, narrated true listener encounters, and interviewed self-proclaimed demonologists. It was theater. It was a campfire story for the digital age. I didn't believe in ghosts any more than a magician believes in real magic. It was all mechanics, sleight of hand, and audio engineering. I rubbed my eyes, the screen's blue light searing my retinas. It was 3:12 a.m. Time to check the inbox, grab the raw files, and get the hell out of here. My producer, Sarah, had already gone home hours ago, leaving me to handle the final export. I opened the show's email account. Usually it was flooded with submissions, badly written creepypastas, fans asking if I was single, and the occasional lunatic claiming to be the reincarnation of H.P. Lovecraft. But tonight, the inbox was sluggish. I refreshed it. At exactly 3:14 a.m., a new message appeared at the top of the list. Subject, no subject. From, redacted, encrypted. Attachment, listen.wave. No body text, no signature, just a raw audio file. I sighed. Spam or a virus, I murmured, hovering the cursor over the trash icon, but curiosity, that professional hazard, stayed my hand. The file size was small, 42 seconds. "All right," I said to the empty room. "Entertain me." I double-clicked the file. The media player popped up. I slid my headphones back on, expecting a jump scare, a scream, a distorted screech.
The usual amateur hour tactics. Instead, I heard silence. I frowned, checking the volume. It was cranked. I leaned in, pressing the leather cups tighter against my ears. It wasn't silence. It was a noise floor. The distinct low-level hiss of a high-gain microphone recording in a quiet room. And then the sound of wet, heavy movement. Breathing. It was slow, rhythmic, and uncomfortably close to the diaphragm of the mic. It didn't sound like a recording. The fidelity was terrifyingly high. It sounded like someone was standing inside my head, right behind my eyes, exhaling down the back of my neck. In, out. In, out. I checked the timestamp. 30 seconds of just breathing. My skin began to prickle, not because it was scary, but because it was weirdly intimate. It felt voyeuristic. Then, at the 40-second mark, the breathing hitched. The waveform on the screen spiked slightly. A whisper cut through the hiss. "Thank you for listening." I jerked back in my chair, the wheels screeching against the plastic floor mat. I ripped the headphones off again, staring at the screen as the playback ended. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't the words. It was the voice. It wasn't a synthesized demon voice. It wasn't a distorted stalker growl. It was me. It was my voice, my pitch, my cadence. It even had the slight sibilance on the S that I usually EQ'd out in post-production. I sat in the silence of the studio, the air conditioner cycling on with a heavy thrum. I played it again. "Thank you for listening." I laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound in the quiet room. "Okay," I said aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "Okay, very funny. AI voice cloning. Cute." I assumed it was a prank. Someone had taken samples of the show, fed them into a learning algorithm, and generated a creepy message. It was impressive tech. The next night, I decided to lean into it. Content is king, after all. During the opening segment, I played the clip. I made a joke about having an evil twin or a timeline variant trying to contact me. "If you're going to clone my voice," I told the audience, chuckling into the mic, "at least have me say something interesting. Give me the winning lotto numbers, not a thank you note." The listeners loved it. The Twitter feed blew up. People speculated it was a viral marketing campaign for a movie or an ARG. I played along. That was my first mistake. I invited it in. The second file arrived the following night.
I was waiting for it, though I wouldn't admit it to myself. I sat at the desk, watching the digital clock on the wall. 3:12, 3:13. The second the numbers flipped to 3:14 a.m., the notification chimed. Subject, no subject. Attachment, hear them.wave. My throat went dry. The punctuality was unnerving. I hesitated, the cursor hovering over the file. The studio felt colder tonight. The shadows in the corner, where the sound-dampening panels met the ceiling, seemed deeper. I put the headphones on. I didn't want to, but I had to know. I hit play. The breathing was there immediately, louder this time, more urgent. It wasn't just air moving. I could hear the wet click of a tongue against the roof of a mouth, the swallow of saliva. It sounded like the person was starving. I watched the waveform scroll, mesmerized by the jagged peaks of the respiration. It was hypnotic. Then, the whisper. "I can hear them through you." I slammed the spacebar to pause it. The voice was identical, but the tone was wrong. It lacked the cynicism, the performative smoothness of my broadcast voice. It was hollow, flat, and it sounded internal. "I can hear them through you." I didn't air that one. I didn't even save it to the show drive. I deleted the email immediately. But the audio file remained in my downloads folder, a digital ghost I couldn't bring myself to purge. I spun my chair around, scanning the small room. The heavy steel door was locked. The security monitor showed the hallway outside was empty, bathed in grainy black and white night vision. No one could get in here without a keycard. And yet, as I sat there, the silence of the studio changed. Usually, a soundproof booth feels dead. The air is still. But now, the air felt pressurized, heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks,
or the feeling of being in a crowded elevator with your eyes closed. I felt a phantom warmth on the back of my neck. I spun around again, nothing but the cracked acoustic foam and the tangled cables of the batch bay. "Stop it," I hissed. "You're tired. You're overworked." But as I turned back to the monitors, I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the vocal booth window. For a split second, the reflection didn't seem to move with me. It looked attentive. I packed up my gear in record time, shoving my laptop into my bag. I practically ran to the elevator, the echo of my own footsteps sounding too loud in the empty building. I drove home in silence.
The radio off. I didn't want to hear any voices. But the silence was worse. In the silence, my brain replayed the clip. I can hear them through you. Who was them? And why did the voice sound so terrifyingly certain? When I got to my apartment, I poured a drink and sat by the window, watching the city sleep. I told myself it was just a superfan with high-end audio equipment, a stalker with a talent for mimicry. But deep down, in the lizard brain part of me that evolved to fear the dark, I knew it wasn't a recording. Because when I listened to that file, underneath the breathing, underneath the whisper, I heard something else. I heard the hum of my studio. Not a generic room tone. My studio. I heard the specific rhythmic rattle of the loose vent over the mixing desk, the one I had been meaning to fix for 6 months, the one that only rattled when the wind blew from the north. The recording hadn't been made in a basement or a bedroom. It had been made in my chair, while I wasn't there, or worse, while I was.
Chapter 2: The Bleed. The following week dissolved into a blur of caffeine, static, and a creeping, prickly sensation at the base of my skull. I tried to maintain the routine. Coffee at 8 p.m., script review at 9, recording from 11 until the early hours. But the studio had changed. The acoustics felt different, sharper, as if the foam padding on the walls had lost its ability to dampen sound. Every click of the mouse, every shift in my chair, seemed to echo with a wet, heavy resonance that shouldn't have been there. I became obsessive about security. Before every session, I checked the hallway. I checked the closet where we stored spare mic stands. I even checked under the desk, feeling ridiculous as I shone my phone's flashlight into the tangle of cables. Empty. Always empty. Yet the pressure remained. It was a physical weight, a density in the air located precisely 3 feet behind my left shoulder. It felt like standing in a crowded subway car, knowing someone is right behind you, feeling their body heat radiating against your back, but turning around to find an empty car. I kept recording. The mortgage wasn't going to pay itself, and the midnight signal had sponsors to appease. On Tuesday, I recorded an episode about electronic voice phenomena, EVPs. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent 40 minutes debunking the idea that ghosts could manipulate magnetic tape or digital frequencies, explaining the psychological phenomenon of pareidolia, how the brain forces random noise into recognizable patterns. We hear what we want to hear, I told the microphone, my voice smooth and authoritative. We fear silence, so we fill it with monsters. I felt clever writing that line. I felt in control. I edited the episode myself on Wednesday. I scrubbed through the waveform, looking for any anomalies. I listened for the breathing. I listened for the whisper. Nothing. Just my voice, clean and crisp. I felt a surge of relief. The previous week's emails had been a fluke, a prank, a glitch. I was letting exhaustion get the better of me. I uploaded the episode at midnight. By 1 a.m., the download numbers were climbing. By 2 a.m., the first email arrived. Subject: audio issue from Sarah K. 92. Hey Elias, love the show. Just a heads up, the audio mix on this one is kinda weird. There's this echo? It's super faint, but it's annoying. Sounds like you left a monitor speaker on in the background. I frowned. I checked the master file again. It was pristine.
I replied with a standard, "Thanks, I'll look into it," and refreshed the inbox. 3 more emails. Subject: who is the guest? From Dead Air Dave. You didn't mention a co-host in the intro. Who's the guy whispering? It's really hard to hear him. Subject: feedback. From Listen Closely. Is this a bit? The backing track is creepy as hell. Good job. My stomach tightened. A cold drop of sweat slid down my spine. I opened the comment thread on the episode's hosting page. Anyone else hear the breathing? It's not breathing, it's muttering. Timestamp 1402. Turn your volume all the way up. WTF is that? I pulled up the project file. I went to 1402. I soloed my vocal track. I cranked the gain until the noise floor hissed like a nest of snakes. We hear what we want to hear, my voice said. Silence. Just the hiss. I slammed my hand on the desk. There is nothing there, I shouted at the screen. The empty studio swallowed my outburst. Then, at 3:14 a.m. exactly, a new email pinged. It wasn't the anonymous sender from before. This was from a regular listener, a guy who went by the handle Audiotech Steve. He was a sound engineer in Chicago who sometimes emailed me tips on compression settings. Subject: I cleaned it up for you. From steve.miller.audio. Attachment: extraction cleaned.wave. Elias, the email read, I don't know how you did this. The frequency masking is incredible. I had to run it through a spectral repair tool and invert the phase of your main vocal to cancel it out. Whatever plugin you're using to hide this second track, it's genius. But I think I found what you buried. My hand hovered over the mouse. I didn't want to click it. I wanted to delete the email, burn the computer, and never step foot in this room again. But the pressure behind my shoulder flared. It felt expectant. I clicked the attachment. The file opened. I put my headphones on, my hands trembling so bad I almost knocked over my water bottle. The clip was short, 10 seconds. It started with a digital garble, the sound of my own voice being phase canceled out, leaving behind the artifacts underneath. It sounded like underwater distortion. And then the second voice cut through. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't a delay. It was a response. Through the headphones, I heard my own voice, the main track, bleeding through faintly as a reference point. Elias, faint. Welcome back to the show. The voice, clear, dry, whispering. He doesn't know yet. My breath hitched. The voice was mine. It was unmistakably mine, but stripped of all humanity. It sounded like my voice if I were dead and trying to remember how to use a tongue. The recording continued. Elias, faint. The voice. He will soon. I ripped the headphones off and threw them across the room. They hit the wall with a plastic crack. I stood up, backing away from the desk until my bat hit the heavy soundproof door. My heart was thundering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Who is there?" I screamed. "Show yourself." The monitors stared back at me,
displaying the spectral frequency of the file. I looked at the waveform Steve had sent. It wasn't just noise. When I looked closely at the visual representation of the sound, the peaks and valleys of the audio wave, I saw the synchronicity. The second voice wasn't overlapping me randomly. It was weaving between my words. It was filling the micropauses in my speech. When I inhaled, it spoke. When I paused for effect, it whispered. It had been there the whole time, occupying the negative space of my existence. I looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. The computer chimed. A new email. The anonymous sender. Subject. No subject. Attachment. Closer.wave. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I left the lights on. I left the computer running. I left the studio door unlocked. I didn't care. I just needed to be around people, around noise, around anything that wasn't that suffocating, calculated silence. I drove to an all-night diner 3 towns over. I sat in a booth under the harsh fluorescent lights, nursing a black coffee, watching the waitress wipe down the counter. I tried to tell myself it was an elaborate hack. Someone had tapped into my microphone remotely. They were listening live and feeding audio back into the stream. But that didn't explain the timing. The second voice spoke in the milliseconds between my thoughts. It anticipated my cadence perfectly. No hacker could do that. No delay could be that low. I stayed at the diner until sunrise. When the morning rush started, the clatter of silverware and the murmur of conversation finally settled my nerves enough to check my phone. There was a voicemail from Sarah, my producer. Elias, hey, I'm at the studio. Why is the door unlocked? And, did you record something after I left? I held the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. No, I said. No, I left right after I uploaded. That's weird, Sarah said.
Her voice tinny through the receiver. Because the project file is open, and there's a new track here. It's labeled The Last Listener. Don't play it, I said, my voice rising. People in the diner turned to look. Sarah, do not play that file. I already did, she said. She sounded confused. Elias, it's just you. It's you sitting in the chair for an hour. You don't say anything. You're just breathing. I closed my eyes. But the weird thing is, she continued, her voice dropping to a hush, the waveform is huge. It looks like you're screaming, but there's no sound, just the breathing. Get out of the studio, I whispered. Sarah, leave, now. Why? You're freaking me out. Just go. I hung up. I stared at the black screen of my phone. He doesn't know yet. He will soon. I knew now. I wasn't just recording a podcast anymore. I was providing a signal, a carrier wave. And something was writing it home.
Chapter 3: The Dead Air. I drove back to the studio doing 80 on the freeway, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I called Sarah 4 times. 4 times it went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful greeting, "Hey, leave a message, I'm probably recording," sounded like a taunt now, a recording of a ghost. By the time I skidded into the parking lot, the sun was high and bright, a harsh, oblivious Tuesday morning. But the building, a converted warehouse in the industrial district, seemed to swallow the light. It sat in a pool of its own shadow. I sprinted to the elevator, jamming the button for the 4th floor. My heart was doing that frantic flutter again, a hummingbird trapped in a rib cage. I wasn't just worried about Sarah. I was worried about what she had heard. The waveform is huge. It looks like you're screaming, but there's no sound. The elevator dinged. The hallway was empty. "Sarah?" I called out. My voice cracked. The door to Suite 404, my studio, was ajar. Just a sliver of darkness visible between the frame and the heavy steel door. I pushed it open. "Sarah? Are you in here?" Silence. Not the quiet of an empty room. The heavy silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums like deep water. The air conditioner was off. The hum of the fridge was gone. The only light came from the dual monitors on the mixing desk, cutting through the gloom with a clinical blue glow. Sarah wasn't there. Her bag was gone. Her jacket was gone. I rushed to the desk. The project file was still open in the DAW, Digital Audio Workstation. There it was. A new track, labeled in Sarah's distinct shorthand. Last listener. Raw. I stared at the waveform. Sarah was right. It was a solid block of blue. In audio engineering, we call it a brick wall. It meant the audio was clipped, distorted, maxed out to the absolute limit of the digital ceiling. It should have sounded like a jet engine taking off inside a blender. But the master output meter? It was dead still. No signal. I sat in the chair, my chair, the one that felt too warm, as if someone had just stood up, and hovered the mouse over the play button. "Don't listen," a rational voice in my head screamed. "Delete it. Format the drive. Burn the building." But I was a podcaster. I was a voyeur of the macabre. Curiosity wasn't just a habit. It was a pathology. I didn't put the headphones on. I wasn't that stupid. I routed the audio to the studio monitors, keeping the volume knob low. I hit spacebar.
The cursor scrolled across the solid blue block. Silence. I turned the volume up. Still silence. I frowned, leaning in. The speakers were active. I could hear the faint self-noise of the amplifiers, but the file itself was emitting nothing. Then I felt it. It started in my teeth, a low, vibrating ache. Then it moved to my chest, a resonance that made my lungs feel heavy. It wasn't silence, it was infrasound. A frequency so low the human ear couldn't register it, but the body could feel it. It was the frequency of dread, the fear note. I watched the cursor scroll. The pressure in the room built until my vision started to swim. The periphery of the room darkened. The cracked foam panel on the back wall seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in time with the thrumming in my bones. I slammed the spacebar to stop it. The pressure vanished instantly. I gasped, sucking in air that suddenly felt too thin. My nose was wet. I wiped it with the back of my hand and pulled it away, smeared with bright red blood. "Okay," I whispered, trembling. "Okay, that's it. Show's over." I grabbed the mouse to close the program. I was going to delete the file. Then I was going to record a 10-second announcement stating that the Midnight Signal was going on indefinite hiatus due to health reasons. Then I was going to find Sarah. I created a new track. I armed the microphone. I cleared my throat. The red record light blinked on the screen. "Hello, everyone," I began. "This is Elias." My voice sounded shaky, weak. I have an announcement to make. Due to unforeseen circumstances." I stopped. The words were forming in my mind. I am ending the podcast. But my tongue felt heavy, numb, like I'd been shot up with Novocaine. I tried again. I am ending. My jaw locked. A spasm of pain shot through my temporomandibular joint.
I couldn't open my mouth to finish the sentence. I tried to force it. I am. Then the pressure returned. That familiar, suffocating weight behind my left shoulder. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was a pilot. My mouth opened. I didn't tell it to. My diaphragm contracted. I didn't inhale. The air rushed out of my lungs, pushed by muscles that were obeying a different signal. I am just getting started, my voice said. I froze. I hadn't thought those words. I hadn't wanted to say them. They had just happened, like a hiccup, like a reflex. I stared at the waveform on the screen. It was recording. No!
I grunted, trying to regain control. Stop. He thinks he can stop, my voice said. It was smooth, rich, the broadcast timbre I had spent years perfecting, but effortless. He thinks the silence is a shield. I grabbed my own throat, my fingers digging into the flesh. I tried to clamp my mouth shut. But the silence is where we meet, my voice continued, bypassing my clamped jaw, resonating in my nasal cavity. The silence is the door. I scrambled backward, kicking the desk. The chair rolled back, hitting the wall with a thud. I was panting, my hands clawing at my neck. The recording continued. The red lines scrolled across the screen, capturing the sound of my panicked breathing. And then, through the studio monitors, simultaneously with my own gasps, the speakers whispered, "Let me in, Elias." It wasn't a recording. The latency was zero. The voice in the speakers was perfectly synchronized with the thought entering my brain. I scrambled for the door, my vision tunneling. I burst out into the hallway, collapsing against the opposite wall. I lay there on the industrial carpet, hyperventilating, waiting for the seizure to pass, waiting for the voice to stop. But it didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was in my head, a faint background narration, narrating my terror. "He's on the floor," the thought echoed, sounding like my own internal monologue, but slightly off. "He's scared. His heart rate is 140. He wants to run." I scrambled to my feet and ran for the stairs. I didn't stop until I was outside, under the blinding sun, amidst the noise of traffic and life. I pulled my phone out to call Sarah again. I had a text message. It had come through 5 minutes ago while I was inside. From Sarah. "Elias, I listened to the file again. I slowed it down." I stared at the screen, the sun glare making it hard to read. From Sarah. "It's not screaming. It's a list. It's reading names, Elias, hundreds of names." My blood ran cold. From Sarah. "My name is on the list. Yours is at the end." I dialed her number. It rang once, then it picked up. "Sarah," I shouted. "Sarah, where are you?" There was a pause, then the sound of breathing, slow, wet, close to the microphone. "Sarah isn't listening right now," a voice said. It was my voice. "But don't worry," it continued, the tone smooth, velvety, terrifyingly familiar. "I'm keeping her seat warm." The line went dead. I looked at the time on my phone.
It wasn't 3:14 a.m. It was 11:42 a.m. The rules were breaking. The time didn't matter anymore. The dark wasn't necessary anymore. My phone vibrated again, a notification from the podcast hosting platform. New episode uploaded successfully, the final guest. I hadn't uploaded anything. I opened the app. The episode was live. It was 40 minutes long. I hit play, holding the phone away from my ear like it was a bomb.
Welcome to the Midnight Signal, my voice purred from the tiny speaker. I'm your host, Elias Thorne, and today we have a very special episode. Today we're going to learn how to listen. I stood in the parking lot, surrounded by the mundane safety of daylight, and listened to myself say things I had never spoken, introducing a show I no longer controlled. And in the background of the audio, underneath my smooth baritone, I heard Sarah screaming.
Chapter 4: The Noise Floor. The sun was blinding, a harsh, indifferent white that bleached the color out of the asphalt, but I was freezing. I stood by my car, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the loop of Sarah's scream. It was a digital, jagged sound, compressed by the streaming platform's algorithm, but the terror in it was high fidelity. I didn't just hear fear, I heard recognition. She wasn't screaming at a monster, she was screaming at me. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what is your emergency? My producer, I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, too high, too thin. I think she's being attacked, at the studio, 404 Industrial Way. Sir, is the attack happening now? I don't know, I'm listening to it. It's on the feed, you have to send someone. The wait for the police was a blur of static. I sat in my car, doors locked, windows up, staring at the warehouse entrance. I expected to see him, my double, the thing wearing my voice, walk out the front door, adjusting his cuffs, maybe whistling a tune. But nothing moved except the heat shimmer rising from the pavement. 2 squad cars arrived 10 minutes later, sirens cutting through the heavy afternoon air. I waved them down, manic, explaining the situation in a torrent of words that sounded crazy even to me. Podcast, audio file, doppelganger, screaming. The officers, a pair of tired-looking veterans who clearly wanted this to be a false alarm, led me back up to the 4th floor. We stepped off the elevator. The hallway was silent. Stay back, sir, the lead officer said, hand resting on his holster. He pushed the door to Suite 404 open. Police, anyone inside? Silence. They swept the room. It took 10 seconds. It's a small studio. Clear, the second officer said. I stepped past them, my eyes darting to the mixing desk. She was here, I insisted. The file, she opened the file. The studio was immaculate. The chair was pushed in. The monitors were black, in sleep mode. And the desk? I ran my hand over the surface where I had seen the blood. Clean. Not just clean, polished. It smelled of lemon pletch. Sir? The lead officer was looking at me with that mix of pity and annoyance reserved for the unstable. There's nobody here, no sign of a struggle. Check the computer, I said, grabbing the mouse. I shook it to wake the screens. The DAW was closed. The desktop was empty. No last listener raw, no project files.
It was here, I whispered. I saw the waveform. It was a brick wall. Sir, have you been sleeping? The officer asked. I have the recording. I fumbled for my phone. The episode. It uploaded automatically. Listen to this. I pulled up the podcast app. The episode, The Final Guest, was at the top of the feed. I hit play, turning the volume to max so they could hear the horror. My voice, smooth, professional, drifted out of the speaker. Welcome to the Midnight Signal. I'm your host, Elias Thorne, and today we're going to learn how to listen. I waited. I braced myself for the scream. Silence is a heavy thing, the voice continued. It weighs on us. It presses into the cracks of our lives. I stared at the phone. The background audio was clean, dead silent. No screaming, no Sarah. Just the voice, pontificating about silence. Wait, I said, scrubbing the timeline back. It was right there, under the intro. I played it again. Presses into the cracks of our lives. Nothing. The officers exchanged a look. Sir, the lead one said gently, it sounds like a podcast. No, I backed away, hitting the wall. No, it changes. Don't you understand? It changes when you listen to it. It knows you're listening.
"Okay, Mr. Thorne, why don't we go outside? You look like you need some air." They filed a report for a wellness check. They didn't file a missing person report for Sarah because, as they pointed out, she was an adult and had only been unreachable for 3 hours. They told me to go home, get some sleep, and call them if she didn't show up for work tomorrow. I watched them drive away. I didn't go home. I got in my car and drove to Sarah's apartment. She lived in a duplex on the edge of town, a quiet place with a porch swing and a dying fern hanging by the door. Her car was in the driveway. I pounded on the door. "Sarah, open up." No answer. I tried the knob. Locked. I went around the back. The kitchen window was cracked open a few inches to let in the breeze. I wasn't proud of it, but I shoved the sash up and climbed over the sink, knocking a drying rack of dishes onto the floor with a deafening clatter. "Sarah?" The apartment smelled like stale toast and vanilla candles. It was dark, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I moved through the kitchen into the living room. "Sarah, please be here." She wasn't on the couch. She wasn't in the bathroom.
I pushed open the door to her bedroom. It was pitch black in there. The blackout curtains were taped to the wall, sealing out every photon of light. The air was hot, stiflingly so. And there was a sound. A low, rhythmic thump hiss. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. I saw the silhouette of her desk in the corner. The blue light of her laptop power button pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Sarah was sitting in the chair. She was facing the wall. She was wearing her large, noise-canceling studio headphones. Her posture was rigid, spine straight, hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles were white in the gloom. "Sarah," I whispered, stepping forward. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. I reached out and touched her shoulder. It was rock hard, the muscles locked in a spasm of tension. "Sarah, we have to go." I pulled the headphones off her ears. She didn't react. She didn't turn around. She just kept staring at the blank wall. I put the headphones to my own ear. I expected the screaming. I expected the voice. But all I heard was me. It was a recording of me from 3 years ago, episode 12. Just a standard narration about the Mothman. Witnesses described a large winged creature. But it was wrong. The audio was reversed. Erutir, Degneed, Erutal, Degra said, Sessentiv. And underneath the reversed speech, buried deep in the mix, was a new sound. It sounded like chewing. Wet, grinding chewing. I looked at the laptop screen. It was black. But as I watched, text began to scroll across it. Not in a word processor. In the command prompt terminal. Green text on black. Listener, ID, Sarah, K. Status, synchronized. Capacity, full. Searching for new host. I dropped the headphones. They clattered to the floor. At the sound, Sarah finally moved. She turned her head. Slowly. Mechanically. Like a rusted servo motor. Her eyes were wide open, but they weren't looking at me. The pupils were blown wide, swallowing the irises, black poles that seemed to vibrate. She opened her mouth. "He's here," she said. But it wasn't her voice. It was mine. It was my voice, coming out of her throat. Perfect pitch, perfect timbre. "He followed you, Elias," Sarah said, using my baritone. "He likes the acoustics in here better." I stumbled back, tripping over a pile of clothes. "Sarah, fight it." She smiled. It was a horrible expression, stretching her face in ways it wasn't meant to stretch. "She can't hear you," my voice said through her lips. She's just the speaker now, and you. She stood up. The movement was fluid, unnatural. You are the feedback loop. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once. Twice. I backed out of the room, my eyes locked on her. She didn't chase me. She just stood there, smiling that wrong smile, vibrating with the sound of my own voice. I scrambled out the window, falling into the dirt of the backyard. I ran to my car, locking the doors, hyperventilating. I pulled my phone out. A new email. Subject: "The signal is stronger." From me. Sent from my own account. Attachment: "You are next. Wave." I didn't open it. Chapter 5: Signal to Noise. I slammed the brakes. The tires locked, shrieking against the asphalt in a high-pitched wail that sounded too much like a human scream. The steering wheel jerked violently to the left, and the world outside the windshield dissolved into a blur of green and gray. I felt the sickening lurch of gravity as the car spun, sliding off the shoulder and plowing into the loose gravel of a drainage ditch. The impact wasn't a crash, it was a heavy, jarring thud that snapped my head back against the headrest. The engine sputtered and died. The radio cut out instantly. Silence slammed into the car like a physical blow. I didn't breathe. My hands were frozen claws on the wheel, my heart hammering a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I stared straight ahead at the steam rising from the hood, terrified to look in the rearview mirror again. There was someone in the back seat. I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a face. My face. Pale, slack-jawed, with eyes that looked like holes punched into a sheet of paper. I counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. I ripped my seatbelt off and threw myself against the driver's side door, tumbling out onto the grass. I scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the vehicle, my heels digging into the dirt. I stared at the car. The back windows were tinted, reflecting the harsh afternoon sun. Nothing moved inside. "Come out," I screamed, my voice cracked, thin and pathetic in the open air. "I know you're in there." A crow cawed from a telephone wire overhead. A semi-truck rumbled past on the highway, its horn blasting a Doppler-shifted warning. Normal sounds. The sounds of a world that didn't care about ghosts or frequencies. I stood there for 5 minutes, panting, waiting for the back door to open, waiting for him to step out wearing my face like a cheap mask. But the door stayed shut. I crept closer, picking up a heavy rock from the ditch. I reached the car, my reflection warping in the glass. I shaded my eyes and peered through the rear window. Empty. Just the upholstery, a discarded fast food wrapper, and my gym bag. I let out a shuddering breath and dropped the rock. It was a hallucination. It had to be. Sleep deprivation, stress, the trauma of seeing Sarah. My brain was misfiring. It was projecting my internal horror onto the external world. But as I leaned against the trunk, trying to steady my shaking legs, I heard it. Faintly.
Coming from inside the car, the radio was off. The keys were in my pocket. The battery should have been dead, but the speakers were whispering. It was a low, static-filled murmur, like a radio tuned between stations. I pressed my ear against the glass. Doesn't matter where he goes. We are the signal. He is the receiver. I backed away, stumbling. I couldn't get back in that car. I couldn't be in a confined space with those speakers. I patted my pockets, wallet, keys, phone. I pulled the phone out. The screen was cracked from the tumble, but it was still on. No signal bars, just a searching icon. Then the screen flickered. The background wallpaper, a photo of a sunset I took in Santa Monica, glitched. The colors inverted. The sun turned black.
a notification popped up. Voice memo recorded. Just now. I didn't play it. I hurled the phone into the woods. I watched it arc through the air and vanish into the underbrush. I started walking. I walked for 3 hours. I kept to the side of the road, head down, flinching every time a car passed, terrified the Doppler effect of the engine would turn into a voice calling my name. By dusk, I found a motel, the Starlight Inn. It was a relic of the 70s, with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. The S and the T were burnt out, so it just read, Arlight Inn. I paid cash for a room at the far end of the lot. The clerk, a guy with grease-stained fingers and a lazy eye, didn't ask for ID. He just slid a physical key across the counter. Checkout's at 11, he grunted. Don't steal the towels. Does the room have a phone? I asked. Yeah. Local calls are free. How do I unplug it? He stared at me. Pull the cord out of the wall, buddy. Room 12 was a box of beige misery. It smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. But it was quiet. No Wi-Fi, no smart speakers. Just a heavy CRT television bolted to the dresser and a rotary phone on the nightstand. I immediately yanked the phone cord from the jack. Then I went to the TV and unplugged it. I checked the alarm clock, an old digital red display model, and unplugged that too. I sat on the edge of the bed in the gathering dark. Silence. Finally, silence. I lay back, closing my eyes. I needed to sleep. If I could just sleep for 10 hours, my brain would reset. The hallucinations would stop. I would wake up and go to the police again. Find a rational explanation for Sarah.
Maybe check myself into a psych ward. Anything was better than this. I drifted. The exhaustion was a heavy black tide pulling me under. Click. My eyes snapped open. The sound had come from the corner of the room. I sat up, heart racing. The room was dark, illuminated only by the sliver of orange streetlight coming through the curtains. Click. It was the sound of a tape recorder button being pressed. I looked at the dresser. The TV was dark. The phone was dead. Click. It was coming from the air vent near the ceiling. And then the sound of rewinding, that high-pitched mechanical squeal of magnetic tape flying backward over a playhead.
Glass exploded outward. Shards rained into the sink. I stood there, panting, staring at the jagged hole in the wall where the medicine cabinet used to be. Behind the glass, there was no wall, no studs, no insulation. Just darkness. And in that darkness, a red light blinked. On, off, on, off. A recording light. I reached into the hole, my hand trembling. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a microphone stand. I pulled it out. It was my Shure SM7B, my studio mic. But the cable didn't go into a wall. It went into my arm. I screamed. I looked down at my right arm. The XLR cable wasn't holding the mic. It was embedded in my wrist. The black rubber cord vanished under my skin, snaking up my forearm like a necrotic vein.
I clawed at it. I dug my fingernails into my own flesh, trying to rip the cable out. There was no blood, only a black, oily substance that smelled like burning plastic. "It's already integrated," the voice said. It was coming from my own throat now. I wasn't speaking, but my vocal cords were vibrating. Hardware installation complete. I fell to my knees on the tile floor, clutching my arm. The room began to hum. The frequency was rising, a high-pitched sine wave that drilled into my teeth. I crawled out of the bathroom. The bedroom had changed. The beige walls were gone. In their place were acoustic foam panels, gray, jagged wedges covering every inch of the room. The bed was gone. In its center sat a desk, my desk. And in the chair, facing away from me, sat a figure. He was wearing my clothes. He had my haircut. He swiveled the chair around. It was me, but perfect, clean-shaven, rested. The eyes were bright and alert. It smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered its prey. "You're late for the session, Elias," it said. "But that's okay. We can fix it in post." It held up a hand. In its palm was a pair of headphones. "Put them on," it commanded. I tried to shout no, but my mouth wouldn't open. My jaw was fused shut. The black oil was leaking from my nose, clogging my airways. "Put them on," it said again, softer this time, "and you'll finally hear what silence really sounds like." I scrambled for the door. I grabbed the handle. It was locked. I pounded on the wood. "Help! Fire! Someone help me!" But no sound came out. I was mute. I turned back to the room. The doppelganger was standing now. He was walking toward me, holding the headphones out like a crown.
"Don't fight the mix," he whispered. He was 3 steps away. 2 steps. He reached out and placed the headphones over my ears. The world went silent. And then the track started.
Chapter 6: The Feedback Loop. The silence didn't last. As the headphones sealed around my ears, the world didn't go quiet. It exploded. It wasn't a sound you hear with your eardrums. It was a sound you hear with your teeth, your marrow, the wet gray matter of your brain. It was a roar of white noise, vast and oceanic, composed of 1,000,000 individual frequencies overlapping until they became a singular, deafening static. I tried to scream, but my jaw was still fused, the skin around my mouth smooth and unbroken like a doll's. I was trapped in the chair, my body rigid, a conductor for a current I couldn't comprehend. The doppelganger, the host, leaned over the mixing desk. His movements were precise, elegant. He adjusted a fader with a manicured finger. The static separated. The white noise unraveled into voices. "I'm scared of the dark. Don't look under the bed. Is anyone there? Elias, help me." It was my audience. Thousands of them. I recognized the usernames from the chat rooms, the cadence of the voicemails I'd screened, the tone of the emails I'd read. But these weren't recorded messages. This was live. I was hearing their thoughts. I was hearing the precise moment their fear spiked as they listened to the midnight signal. "You built a magnificent network, Elias," the host said. His voice didn't come through the headphones. It vibrated directly into my skull, bypassing the auditory nerve. "Fear is energy," he explained, sliding another fader up. "Kinetic, raw,
but it dissipates if it isn't captured. You created a battery. You just didn't know how to charge it. The pain in my right arm flared. I looked down. The XLR cable embedded in my wrist was pulsing. With every spike of fear from the chorus of voices in my head, a black, viscous fluid pumped through the cable, traveling up my arm and into the mixing desk. I was the interface. I was the patch bay connecting the human world to whatever this was. "Let's check the levels," the host smiled. He pointed to a monitor. It wasn't showing a waveform anymore. It was showing a video feed. Grainy, black and white night vision. A bedroom. A teenager lying in bed, earbuds in, eyes wide open staring at the ceiling. "Subject 409, the host narrated, listening to episode 42, the one about the Shadow Babel.
He's visualizing a figure in the corner of his room. On the screen, the shadows in the corner of the boy's room began to coalesce. They thickened, gathering mass, responding to the boy's focused terror. He's creating it, the host whispered. We just provide the blueprint. He provides the brick and mortar. I struggled against the chair. I tried to mentally block the voices, to think of anything else. A song, a math problem, a grocery list. "Stop," I screamed internally. "You're killing them." The host chuckled. "We aren't killing them. We are harvesting. Sustainable agriculture, Elias. We take a little sleep, a little peace of mind. They get a story. Fair trade." He spun a knob labeled gain. The scream in my head was blinding. The boy on the screen convulsed as the shadow detached itself from the wall and leaned over his bed. The black fluid in the cable pumped faster. My veins burned like they were filled with acid. "But the battery is almost full," the host said, turning to look at me. His eyes were voids, two perfect circles of Vantablack. "And the hardware is becoming obsolete. Analog flesh in a digital age, it degrades too quickly." He reached out and touched my face. His fingers were freezing. "We need a permanent server, something that doesn't sleep, something that doesn't question the programming." He pressed his thumb against my forehead. "Upload complete in 3, 2, panic. Primal and absolute flooded my system. I wasn't going to die. I was going to be overwritten. I would become a background process, a ghost in the machine, watching him wear my life while I drifted in the static forever. No! I didn't try to scream with my mouth. I didn't try to pull my arm free. I focused on the sound, the feedback. I remembered the basics of audio engineering. A feedback loop happens when the output is fed back into the input. It creates a screech that destroys speakers, blows amps, and shatters glass. I was the input. He was the output. I grabbed the fear, the boy's fear, Sarah's fear, my own terror, and instead of letting it flow into the desk, I shoved it back. I pushed the signal backwards through the XLR cable. I imagined the sound of a microphone being thrown into a jet engine. I visualized the waveform spiking so hard it turned into a solid block of red. "Listen to this." I projected the thought with every ounce of will I had left. The host's eyes widened. The smooth, arrogant smile faltered. The mixing desk sparked.
The VU meters pinned to the right, the needles snapping off. The monitors flickered, the image of the boy distorting into jagged geometric shapes. A high-pitched whine began to rise in the room. It wasn't digital. It was the sound of reality tearing. "Stop," the host commanded, his voice distorting, dropping an octave. "You will crash the system." Good, I thought. I pushed harder. I poured every nightmare I had ever narrated, every urban legend, every ghost story back into the cable. The cable in my wrist bulged. The black skin around it began to smoke. The host screamed, a sound like grinding metal, and clamped his hands over his ears. The acoustic foam on the walls began to bleed. Thick red liquid oozed from the pores of the gray sponge. The floor tilted. The whine hit a frequency that shattered thought. Snap.
It hit the wall and shattered, but the red numbers remained glowing in the air for a second before fading like a dying ember. I needed to leave. I needed to get away from technology, from electricity, from anything that could carry a signal. But as I reached for the doorknob, I stopped. I could hear them. Not with my ears. Inside my head. A low background murmur. Like standing in a crowded room with earplugs in. Did you hear the new episode? Elias sounds different. I think something is in my house. The connection hadn't been severed. I had just overloaded the local terminal. The network was still live. And I was still a node. I realized then that running was useless. The signal didn't care about geography. It traveled at the speed of light. I could go to the desert, to a cave, to the bottom of the ocean, and I would still hear them. And he would still find me, because he had the master tapes. I grabbed my keys from the floor. I grabbed my bag. I left the phone in the woods. There was only one place to go. The source. I had to go back to the studio. Not the motel hallucination, but the physical room at 404 Industrial Way. I had to destroy the transmitter. I opened the motel door. The night air was cool, but it felt dead. The crickets were silent. The distant highway was silent. I walked to my car. I didn't look in the back seat this time. I didn't care. I got in, jammed the key in the ignition, and turned it. The engine roared to life. The radio turned on automatically. I reached out to smash the power button, but a hand grabbed my wrist. I froze. The hand was pale, strong. The grip was crushing. It came from the passenger seat. I turned my head slowly. Sarah was sitting there. Her clothes were torn. Her eyes were gone. Just empty, bloody sockets. Her mouth was stitched shut with black wire. But she wasn't screaming. She raised a finger to her stitched lips. Shh. Then her voice, clear, uninjured, and terrifyingly calm, spoke from the car speakers. Drive, Elias. We're burning daylight.
Chapter 7. The Ad Break. I drove. My hands were locked on the steering wheel at 10 and 2,
gripping the leather so hard my knuckles turned the color of old bone. The speedometer needle hovered at 45, a steady, hypnotic drift through the empty streets. I didn't look right. I couldn't. In my peripheral vision, the thing that used to be Sarah sat motionless. She was a ruin of a human being. The black wire stitching her lips together caught the glare of the passing streetlights, glinting like wet spiderwebs. Her empty eye sockets were dark tunnels, yet I could feel them watching me, tracking the micro-movements of my fear. The silence in the car was heavy, pressurized. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the anticipation of it. Then, the stereo display lit up. Blue text scrolled across the small LCD screen. Now playing, the interview. So, Sarah's voice purred from the speakers, crisp, high fidelity, utterly disconnected from her mutilated face. Tell me about your process, Elias. How do you choose which stories to tell? I swallowed, my throat clicking dryly. I don't, I whispered. I just read what people send me. Modest, the voice chided. You curate. You select the sharpest knives. You pick the ones that cut deep enough to leave a scar. The car swerved slightly. I hadn't turned the wheel. Eyes on the road, the speakers warned. What do you want? I asked, my voice trembling. You have the show. You have the audience. Why me? Why Sarah? Sarah's head turned, the vertebrae in her neck propped audibly, a sound like dry branches snapping. She faced me fully now, the hollow sockets staring into my soul. Because you're the host, Elias. You invited us in. You built the temple, set up the altar, and turned on the microphone. Did you really think no one would answer? The radio static surged, a wave of white noise that sounded like ocean surf crashing against jagged rocks. We are the answer, the voice continued, dropping an octave, becoming a dual-tone harmonic that vibrated the fillings in my teeth. We are the frequency that exists between stations, the static you ignore, the hum of the refrigerator in an empty house, the wind in the telephone wires. I drove past a gas station. The lights under the canopy flickered in unison as we passed, Morse code for a distress signal I couldn't read. And Sarah, I choked out. What is she? Sarah is a repeater, the voice said dismissively, a signal booster. The reception was getting spotty. We needed more gain. The thing in the passenger seat raised a hand. Its fingers were broken, bent at impossible angles, but it moved with fluid grace. It reached out and touched the dashboard. The plastic melted under its touch. Black, oily smoke curled up, smelling of ozone and burning hair. We're almost there, the voice said. But first, a word from our sponsor. The car slammed to a halt. I didn't touch the brakes. The car just stopped dead in the middle of the road, throwing me against the seatbelt. The engine died. The headlights cut out. Total darkness. Our sponsor tonight is isolation, the voice whispered from the dead speakers. The locks clicked down. Thud, 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 thud. I pulled the handle. Locked. I slammed my shoulder against the glass. It didn't break. It didn't even vibrate. Isolation, the voice croned. For when you absolutely, positively, need to be alone with your thoughts, or ours. In the dark, I heard the stitching on Sarah's mouth tear. Rip. It was a wet, tearing sound. Do you know why we stitched her shut, Elias? I pressed myself against the driver's door, trying to merge with the metal. No, I whimpered. Because she wouldn't stop screaming. It was ruining the mix. A soft blue light began to emanate from Sarah's open mouth. It wasn't a flashlight or a glow stick. It was the color of a computer screen in a dark room. The light illuminated the inside of her mouth. There was no tongue, no teeth, just a speaker cone.
a black paper diaphragm, vibrating in her throat. "But you," the speaker mouth said, the sound not coming from the car stereo anymore, but directly from her throat, raw and loud. "You have such a lovely voice. We won't need to stitch you." The speaker in her throat pulsed. A blast of infrasound hit me in the chest. I gasped, the air knocked out of me. My vision swam. "Drive," the mouth commanded. The engine roared back to life. The headlights blazed on. My foot slammed onto the gas pedal. I didn't tell it to. My leg moved on its own, a puppet on a string. We tore down the string, running red lights, drifting around corners. I was a passenger in my own body, watching my hands steer, feeling my foot accelerate. We were entering the industrial district. The warehouses loomed like giant tombstones, black shapes against a purple, bruised sky. "Turn left," the throat speaker said. My hands spun the wheel. "Right."
We swerved into the alleyway behind the studio. The building at 404 Industrial Way was different. Before, it had been a nondescript brick block. Now it seemed to be breathing. The windows were pulsing with a rhythmic red light. The brickwork looked soft, wet, like raw meat. And from the roof, a massive, impossible antenna spiraled up into the clouds, made of twisted metal and bone? My car skidded to a halt in front of the loading dock. "We're here," Sarah said. The light in her mouth faded. Her head slumped forward. The strings cut. She was just a corpse again. The door locks clicked open. "Go inside, Elias," the car stereo whispered one last time. "The audience is waiting." I stumbled out of the car. My legs felt like jelly. I looked back at Sarah. She didn't move. She had served her purpose. She was just discarded hardware. I looked up at the building. The red light from the windows bathed the alley in the color of a developing room. I could hear the hum. It was louder here. A physical vibration that rattled the fillings in my teeth and made the scar on my wrist itch furiously. I walked to the heavy steel door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of old coffee and dust anymore. It smelled like ozone and copper, the smell of an electrical fire. And underneath that, the smell of a crowded room. Sweat, breath, anticipation. I stepped into the lobby. The security desk was empty. The monitors were all on, displaying static. But the elevator doors were open, waiting. And inside the elevator, there was a microphone stand. Just a stand, with my Shure SM7B mounted on it. The cable ran out of the elevator, across the floor, and up the stairs. I knew I shouldn't get in. I knew it was a trap, but the narrative demanded it. You don't walk away in the third act. You go down the stairs. You open the door. You get in the elevator. I stepped inside. The door slid shut with a sound like a guillotine dropping. There were no buttons on the panel, just a single glowing red light where the floor numbers should be. The elevator didn't go up. It went down. Going down, a recorded voice said. It was my voice. To the basement, to the archives, to the place where we keep the outtakes. I gripped the microphone stand for balance as the floor dropped out from under me. We were falling fast. Too fast. The air pressure built in my ears. The hum grew to a roar.
I looked at the microphone. The red on-air light on the elevator panel flickered. I leaned in close to the mic. "If anyone is listening," I whispered, my voice shaking. "If anyone can hear this." The elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors opened, and I saw the studio. It wasn't a room. It was a cathedral.
Chapter 8: The Carrier Wave. The elevator doors didn't just slide open, they retracted into the walls with the hiss of a depressurizing airlock. I stepped out, my boots sinking into a floor that felt spongy and organic. I looked down. It wasn't carpet. It was a dense, matted weave of black cables, thousands of them, twisting over each other like a nest of sleeping vipers. They pulsed rhythmically, carrying a faint bioluminescent blue light that flowed like arterial blood. I looked up, and my breath caught in a throat that felt like it was filled with ground glass. Cathedral was the only word for it, but it was a blasphemy of the concept. The space was vast, a subterranean cavern that stretched upward into a darkness I couldn't penetrate. But where there should have been stone arches and stained glass, there were speakers. Walls of them. They rose in towering columns, stacked floor to ceiling. Massive subwoofers the size of jet engines at the base, tapering up to mid-range cones, and finally, millions of tiny tweeters clustering near the roof like the compound eyes of insects. They were all active. The cones pushed and pulled in perfect unison, a silent, synchronized breathing that displaced the air in the room with concussive force. Thump, thump, thump. It was a heartbeat, a mechanical, amplified heartbeat that overrode my own. "Welcome to the server room," a voice echoed. It came from everywhere and nowhere, panning around the room in 360-degree surround sound. I walked forward, the cables shifting under my feet. The air was hot and smelled of ozone, burning dust, and unwashed bodies. That's when I saw the congregation. In the center of the nave, arranged in concentric circles facing a raised dais, were the listeners. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The rows vanished into the gloom. They were standing, swaying slightly to the rhythm of the speaker walls. I moved closer, fighting the urge to vomit. They weren't wearing headphones. They didn't need them. Thick black cables, the same ones making up the floor, snaked up their legs, burrowing under their clothes, and emerged at the base of their skulls. The wires had fused with their flesh, the skin growing over the rubber insulation in angry red keloids. I recognized the man in the nearest row. He was wearing a faded mechanic shirt. Audio tech Steve. "Steve?" I whispered. He didn't turn. His eyes were open, but the pupils were gone. In their places were tiny,
glowing power indicators, a steady green light. His mouth hung slack, and from his throat came a low, continuous drone, a specific frequency. I realized with a jolt of horror that they weren't just listening, they were transmitting. Each person in the room was humming a different note. Together they formed a chord, a massive, dissonant chord of human misery that fed the speakers on the walls. "They are beautiful, aren't they?" the voice boomed. "The ultimate choir. No ego, no solos, just the signal." I looked toward the dais at the far end of the room. It wasn't an altar, it was a sound booth. A glass box suspended 10 feet in the air by thick bundles of cabling, glowing with a soft, clinical white light. It was the only clean thing in this entire dungeon of wire and flesh. And inside, sitting at a mixing desk that looked like the cockpit of a spacecraft, was him, the host. He spun his chair around to face me. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the resemblance. He wasn't just my double,
he was my better. His posture was perfect. His suit was tailored. He looked like the version of me that existed only in press photos and promotional materials. He tapped the glass of the booth. Tink, tink. The sound was amplified instantly, booming through the cavern like a gunshot. The congregation flinched in unison. "Come up, Elias," the host said, his voice smooth as velvet. "We've been saving a seat for you. The guest mic is live." I didn't want to move. Every instinct I had left screamed at me to run, to find the elevator, to claw my way back to the surface. But the floor had other ideas. The cables around my ankles tightened. They didn't grab me, they just guided me. They shifted, pushing my feet forward. The hum of the congregation intensified, vibrating in my bones, pushing me toward the dais. I walked past the rows of listeners. I saw faces I recognized from profile pictures. A college student, a grandmother, a truck driver. All of them vacant, all of them humming, all of them enslaved to the narrative I had helped build. I reached the base of the dais. A metal staircase spiraled up to the floating booth. I climbed. My hand brushed the railing, and I felt a shock. Static electricity, but heavy, oily. I reached the top. The door to the booth hissed open. I stepped inside. The silence here was absolute. The glass walls were thick, isolating us from the roar of the cathedral outside. The air was cool and filtered.
The host sat in a leather executive chair, smiling. "You look terrible," he said, gesturing to my torn clothes, the blood on my shirt, the madness in my eyes. "The road takes a toll, doesn't it?" "Shut it down," I rasped. My voice sounded small in the acoustic perfection of the booth. "Let them go." The host laughed. He spun back to the desk. It was a massive console, hundreds of channels, thousands of knobs. But instead of labels like kick drum or vocal, the strips were labeled with names. Sarah K., Steve M., Subject 409. Let them go? The host touched a fader labeled Sarah K. He slid it up slightly. Outside in the distance, I heard a scream cut through the drone. They don't want to go, Elias. They want to be part of the story. People are desperate to be heard. We just gave them a permanent voice. He pointed to an empty chair next to him. In front of it was a gold-plated microphone. Sit. I'm not doing this, I said, backing against the door. I'm not recording anything for you. Oh, you misunderstand, the host said, his eyes flashing with that deep Vantablack void. You aren't here to record. You're here to listen. He pressed a button on the console. Solo. A heavy pair of headphones dropped from the ceiling, dangling in front of my face. You see, Elias, the circuit is almost complete. We have the transmitters. He gestured to the crowd below. We have the processor. He tapped his own chest. But we are missing the final component, the ground, the sink, the place where the signal goes to die. He stood up. He was taller than me, stronger. Every story needs an ending. Every scream needs an ear. He stepped toward me. We created this entire frequency for one listener, the last listener, the one who can absorb the totality of the terror without breaking. I looked at the headphones. They were humming. Why me? I asked, tears stinging my eyes. Because you didn't believe, the host whispered, leaning in close. I could smell him. He smelled like new car interior,
and antiseptic. You thought you were immune. That makes you the perfect vessel, an empty cup. He grabbed my shoulders. His grip was iron. He forced me into the chair. "No," I shouted, struggling. But the cables from the floor shot up, wrapping around my wrists, my ankles, my chest. They bound me to the chair. The host picked up the headphones. "The broadcast is going global in 10 minutes.
He said, checking a timer on the console. "We're expanding the network, but first you need to sync up." He lowered the headphones over my ears. "Don't worry," he smiled, his teeth too white, too street. "It only hurts for forever." He let go, the cups sealed against my head. I expected the noise. I expected the screaming. But what I heard was worse. I heard the future. I heard the sound of 1 billion phones lighting up at once. I heard the sound of 1 billion notifications chiming in the dark. I heard the collective intake of breath of a world about to listen to the sound of its own demise. And then, underneath it all, I heard a voice. It wasn't the host's voice. It wasn't my voice. It was a third voice, something ancient, something that sounded like the shifting of tectonic plates. "Is he ready?" the deep voice rumbled. The host looked at me, his hand hovering over the master fader. He winked. "He's all ears." He slammed the fader to the top.
Chapter 9: The Dead Air Paradox. The sound didn't hit me like a wall. It hit me like an ocean. It wasn't just volume. Volume is physical. It vibrates the eardrums. This was data. It was a torrential download of pure, distilled terror, forced directly into the wet gray mefer of my brain. I heard the collective nightmare of the human race. I heard a child in Mumbai crying because the closet door creaked. I heard an old man in Ohio listening to the settling of his house and hearing footsteps. I heard the stifled gasp of a woman in London walking home alone in the fog. Millions of individual frequencies, all screaming at once. And underneath them all, the carrier wave, the third voice. It sounded like the shifting of tectonic plates deep underground, a grinding geological hunger. It wasn't speaking words, it was speaking intent. It was a vast, mindless mouth opening wide to swallow the signal we were feeding it. My body convulsed in the chair. The cables bound around my chest tightened, squeezing the air from my lungs. I tried to scream, to add my own voice to the cacophony, but I was paralyzed. My vocal cords were locked in a rictus of silent agony. "Look at the numbers, Elias," the host said, his voice cutting through the mental storm like a scalpel. He pointed to the massive console. The meters were redlining. A digital map of the world on the main screen was lighting up, city by city, glowing with a sickly, bioluminescent blue. "Tokyo is tuning in," he narrated, his tone smooth, professional. The perfect radio DJ at the end of the world. "New York is waking up. They're putting in their earbuds. They're connecting to the Bluetooth in their cars. They think it's just a special episode." He laughed, a sound that echoed in the acoustically dead booth. "They don't know it's a live feed of their own extinction." I struggled to focus. The pain was blinding. My vision was tunneling, the edges fraying into static. But through the noise, I locked eyes with him. He looked bored. He was checking his fingernails. He was adjusting the cuff of his shirt.
He was the master of ceremonies, so confident in the script that he didn't even need to watch the stage. And that was the flaw. He was a broadcaster. He was output only. He had forgotten the first rule of the medium. The listener has the power. The listener completes the circuit. I closed my eyes. I stopped fighting the noise. I let the scream of the world wash over me.
I let the third voice grind against my skull. I didn't resist it. I accepted it. I became the sink, the ground. "You're quiet, Elias," the host taunted, reaching for a knob labeled compression. "Let's squeeze a little more juice out of you." He twisted the knob. The pressure in my head doubled. Blood began to trickle from my nose, hot and metallic. But I held on to a single thought, a single memory. The studio. The cracked foam panel. The coffee stain shaped like a map. I focused on the mundane, the boring, the reality of the physical world. I forced my mind to narrate. The host sits in his chair, I thought, projecting the words with every ounce of will I had left. He thinks he is in control, but he has a tell, a twitch in his left eye. The host froze. His hand hovered over the console. I pushed harder. I used the connection, the very cables binding me, to send a signal back up the line. He is afraid. I narrated internally. He is just a recording, a copy, and copies degrade. The host's left eye twitched. He slapped a hand over his face. "Stop that." "No." I managed to croak. My voice was weak, barely a whisper in the room. But in the psychic network of the cathedral, it was a thunderclap. I'm the host now. I looked at the third voice, that massive, grinding presence in the deep background of the signal. It was hungry. It didn't care about the script. It just wanted to eat. And I was the one holding the spoon. The entity is hungry. I narrated, staring straight at the host. And it realizes the signal from the chair is getting stale. It wants fresh meat. The floor of the booth shuddered. The host stood up, knocking his expensive chair over. I said stop. You are the receiver. You do not transmit. I'm giving them what they want. I whispered, blood bubbling past my lips. I focused on the third voice. I invited it in. Not into me, but into him. Look at him, I told the ancient static. He's full of fear,
terrified of being canceled. He's terrified of the silence. The deep geological rumble shifted. The grinding sound moved. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was above him. The lights in the booth flickered. The digital map on the screen glitched. The blue lights turning a violent, angry red. The host backed away from the console. "What are you doing?" "The levels. They're peaking." "Feedback loop." I grinned. My teeth stained red. "I'm feeding the output back into the input."
I visualized the sound of a microphone screaming. I visualized the screech of audio tearing itself apart. Screech. The sound that erupted from the console wasn't human. It was the digital death rattle of a corrupted file. The host screamed. He grabbed his head, his perfect suit rippling as if the air around him was boiling. "Cut the feed," he shrieked. "Cut it!" He lunged for the master fader. "No," I said. I kicked out. The cables binding my legs were loose. The system was losing coherence. I caught him in the stomach. He stumbled back, crashing into the glass wall of the booth. Crack. A spiderweb fracture appeared in the glass. Outside, in the cathedral, the rhythm changed. The wall of speakers stopped their synchronized thumping. They began to wail, a discordant, chaotic noise that sounded like a million people waking up from a nightmare at the same time. The congregation looked up. The glowing green lights in their eyes flickered and died. Steve, audio tech Steve, blinked. He looked around, confusion replacing the vacancy in his face. He reached up and tore the cable from the back of his neck. It came free with a spray of blood. He screamed, but it was his own scream, a human scream. Then another listener did it, and another. The cord of misery broke. The host looked down at the chaos in the nave, his face, my face, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "You're ruining the show!" he yelled, his voice distorted, shifting pitch, becoming tinny and small. "The show's over," I said. I ripped my right arm free from the restraint. The skin tore, but I didn't feel it. Adrenaline was the only drug I needed now. I reached for the console. I didn't reach for the faders. I reached for the power supply. A thick, shielded cable pulsing with that same blue bioluminescence plugged into the side of the desk. "Don't!" The host lunged at me. His hands closed around my throat, but his grip was weak. His hands felt soft, spongy. He was degrading. The signal was failing, and without the signal, he was just noise. I punched him. My fist connected with his jaw, and it felt like hitting wet clay. His face deformed, the jaw sliding sideways, staying there. He gurgled, black static leaking from his mouth. I grabbed the power cable with both hands. It was hot, burning my palms. "This is Elias Thorne," I shouted, my voice cracking, booming through the dying system. Signing off. I yanked the cable. It didn't just unplug.
It tore. An arc of blue lightning exploded from the severed connection. It hit the host square in the chest. He didn't die. He erased. He dissolved into pixels, into grain, into hiss. He screamed one last time, a sound of pure digital artifacting, and then he was gone. Just a pile of empty clothes on the floor. The booth went dark. The hum died. The third voice, that ancient, hungry presence, let out a low, disappointed groan that shook the foundations of the building. It was retreating, fading back into the bedrock. Silence crashed into the room.
real silence. I sat there in the dark, panting, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I waited for the credits. I waited for the outro music. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then, a sound from below. Crack. The glass floor of the booth groaned. Crack. Snap. The suspension cables were snapping. The system was dead, and gravity was remembering its job. The booth tilted violently. I slid across the floor, crashing into the console. Snap. The last cable gave way. The booth fell.
Chapter 10: The Final Mix. The fall didn't kill me. The silence almost did. The booth crashed into the nave of the cathedral with the sound of a bomb going off inside a library. Glass shattered into a million diamond fragments, raining down on the tangled mess of cables and flesh below. I remember the impact, a bone-jarring slam that snapped my left arm and knocked the wind out of me. And then, the darkness. When I woke up, the world was gray. Dust hung in the air, thick and choking. The bioluminescent blue light of the cables had faded to a dull, dead gray. The walls of speakers were silent. The heartbeat was gone. I crawled out of the wreckage of the booth, my body screaming in protest. I looked around. The congregation was waking up. Hundreds of people, dazed, bleeding, stumbling through the dark cavern. They were pulling the dead wires from their necks, weeping, calling out names. I saw Steve sitting on a pile of subwoofer cabinets, holding his head, rocking back and forth. He looked at me, his eyes human again, filled with a terrified recognition. "Elias?" he croaked. I tried to answer, but no sound came out. My throat was raw meat. I nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dust on my face. Then came the sirens, not the digital wail of a corrupted file, but the real, Doppler-shifting scream of emergency vehicles. The heavy steel doors of the warehouse above were breached. Flashlights cut through the gloom. Men in tactical gear descended the stairs, shouting orders. It was over. The signal was dead. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospitals, police interviews, and the suffocating sterility of the real world. The official story was a gas leak, mass hallucination caused by carbon monoxide poisoning in an illegal rave held in the basement of the industrial district. Sarah's death was ruled a homicide, attributed to a drifter who had been squatting in the building. They didn't find the host. They found a pile of clothes in the wreckage of the booth, but no body, no DNA, just an empty suit. I couldn't speak. The doctor said it was vocal cord paralysis from the trauma. Psychogenic aphonia. They said my voice might come back with therapy. I didn't want it back. I moved out of the city. I found a small cabin in the mountains, miles away from the nearest cell tower. No internet, no radio, no TV. I stripped the house of anything that could receive a signal. I lived in a world of analog silence. The wind in the trees.
I told myself I was safe. I told myself I had won. I had pulled the plug. I had killed the doppelganger. But silence is tricky. If you listen to it long enough, it starts to have a texture, a grain. It started 3 nights ago. I was sitting on the porch, watching the moon rise. It was a clear, cold night. I reached for my coffee cup. My hand moved. I watched it grasp the handle. I felt the ceramic warmth against my palm. But there was a delay, a fraction of a second, a tiny, imperceptible lag between my brain sending the command and my hand executing it.
I frowned. I clenched my fist. Open. Close. There it was again. Latency. It was like playing a video game on a bad connection. The input lag. I went inside. I looked in the mirror above the bathroom sink. I stared into my own eyes. "Hello," I mouthed. My reflection blinked, but it blinked after I did. I backed away, my heart hammering. I stumbled into the living room. The silence of the cabin suddenly felt heavy, pressurized. The air felt like the inside of a recording booth. I went to the closet. I dug out the old battery-operated radio I kept for emergencies. I hadn't touched it in months. I extended the antenna. I turned the dial. Static. Just white noise. I kept turning, searching for a station, searching for anything real. And then, through the hiss, I heard it. Elias. It wasn't a broadcast. It was coming from inside the radio, not the speaker, but the device itself. "You can't unplug the source, Elias." I threw the radio against the wall. It smashed, batteries rolling across the floor. But the voice didn't stop. "Because you aren't the source anymore." I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The lag was getting worse. My movements felt jerky, disconnected. I tried to scream, to force air through my paralyzed cords. "No!" The sound that tore from my throat wasn't a scream. It was a burst of static. I clapped my hands over my mouth. I looked at my wrist, the scar where the XLR cable had been. It wasn't a scar. It was a port. A black circular input jack, perfectly healed into the flesh. I realized then what had happened in the booth. I hadn't killed the host. I hadn't erased him. When I grabbed the power cable, when the blue lightning hit us, I didn't destroy the signal. I became the recording, the host, the digital entity, the thing of pure frequency, didn't die. He uploaded.
He swapped places. He took the meat. He took the world. He took the sunlight and the fresh air and the freedom. And he left me here, in the delay, in the buffer. I am the echo. I looked at the clock on the mantle. It was an old wind-up model, analog, safe. But the hands were spinning backward, and then they stopped. 3:14. The cabin dissolved. The wood walls melted into gray acoustic foam. The window looking out at the mountains turned into the dark glass of a sound booth. I wasn't in the mountains. I never left the studio. I was sitting in the chair. The microphone was in front of me. The on-air light was glowing a bloody, unblinking red. My headphones were on. I couldn't take them off. My hands were fused to the desk. I looked through the glass. Standing on the other side, in the control room, was a man. He looked exactly like me, but better, rested, happy. He was wearing my clothes. He was holding my car keys. He was smiling. He reached out and pressed the talkback button. "Don't worry, Elias." His voice, my voice, came through my headphones. "I'll take good care of them. The listeners need a host who can really go out and meet them." He turned to leave. "Wait," I shouted. My voice was back. It was clear, perfect, the voice of a radio god. "Please." The host paused at the door. He looked back at me, his eyes twinkling with a terrible, stolen humanity. "You have a job to do," he said. "The show must go on. You're the archive now. You have to keep them listening, forever." He flicked the light switch. The control room went dark. He walked out, closing the heavy steel door behind him. I was alone, in the dark, in the silence. But it wasn't silent. Through the headphones, I heard them. Millions of them. The listeners. They were waiting. They were hungry.
red light on the console blinked. Recording. I had no choice. I opened my mouth. The words flowed out, not because I wanted them to, but because that is what I am programmed to do. Hello, everyone. This is Elias Thorne. I watched the waveform on the screen. It was a perfect, flat line of despair. And welcome to the midnight signal. I took a breath. The air tasted of copper and ozone. Tonight's episode is a special one. It's a story about a man who thought he could stop listening. I leaned into the microphone, my voice dropping to a whisper. But he forgot the most important rule. I paused. The delay caught up to me. Once you hear it,
You belong to it. I stared into the red light. Thank you for listening. And in the darkness of the studio, just behind my left shoulder, I heard a breath. It wasn't mine.